Music of the Soul Prelude, Chapter 14. Krista hurried down the plain white hallway towards the training grounds in her dirt brown gi, the sturdy brown pants and sturdy fold-over shirt that she wore during her physical training classes. Her mind was racing as she raced down the hall at a mere jog. Running was not allowed indoors. She had been stopped by Malik after class for a lecture on inattention and to inform her that she would be taking supplementary lessons because of her bad grades in his class. It wasn't as though she wasn't trying. She just couldn't concentrate, and he was throwing away all of her class assignments, all of them, without even looking at them. She was sure her grades would be more than acceptable if he took the time to fairly grade her work like he did with everyone else in class. She'd even given a presentation, not something she could do well because she got so nervous being in front of people, and he gave her a 0 on it out of sheer principle, even though it had all the necessary points covered. She was angry at the unfairness of it all and disappointed in herself for not doing better. Her thoughts skittered like drops of water on a hot skillet as she rounded a corner, nearly running into another student on their way out of one of the dorm rooms, earning her a dark flower. She apologized absently, barely registering the rude gesture the student made as she rushed past them down the hall. She expected little else these days. She was glad that she had 2 friends here, but it didn't seem enough to make up for everyone else bullying her at every opportunity. She had never been a strong person. It took little to make her cry because she almost always felt like crying anyway, and was wary of days where she was happy. But all this bullying was wearing her down. She'd always had a low opinion of herself, but had tried to believe there was something good about her, some use to her if she was still alive, and still had people to call friend. Anymore, it seemed that it was all a lie, that Ileana and Hachiro only tolerated her out of pity, or perhaps out of a power play. She wouldn't put it past Hachiro to do that. That behind her back they laughed at her or talked poorly about her. She tried her best to be a good person, to be good enough, but always she failed. Nothing she did was ever good enough because she was not good enough as a person. She was weak and stupid and lazy and fat and ugly, and better off never having been born. She knew these thoughts were dangerous, and she no longer cared. She had stopped caring when she was 14. Krista blinked at the blinding sunlight as she exited one of the dorm buildings. The sky held not a cloud, and the sun seemed to make everything seem brighter, more alive, more vivid. The grass near her feet seemed greener for some reason, the buildings wider, the dirt darker and richer. A soft breeze blew hair into her face and ruffled her shirt, but she hardly noticed it, even though it was chilly enough to make her break out into gooseflesh. She walked quickly, mindlessly, down the beaten dirt path that led to the group of buildings that held classrooms, splitting before that into 2 paths, one towards the training grounds, which rested in front of the infirmary building. The training grounds themselves was bare ground, beaten by generations of feet and bodies that had trampled the ground to near stone hardness. The breeze kicked up dust from the ground, and rain barely touched it during the autumn and winter, much like the soil in the front yard of the house she grew up in, only that had not been beaten by anything. That had been clay soil. Leaning against the infirmary building was a small shed filled with wooden weapons, such as swords and quarterstaves, daggers, and wooden guns for practice, as well as bags of padded armor to wear while practicing fighting techniques. A black padded shield with a concave curve to it leaned against the outside wall of the shack, the handles on the back curving outward as though it had just been used and set aside. Next to it was a thick wooden pole held upright by a tire that had been filled with cement, the pole itself thickly padded. She was particularly familiar with that tool, as she had used it often to vent her frustrations, particularly with her kicks. She liked kicks for some reason. Right now, the training yard was empty save for herself. She had expected as much, since this was her assigned private class with Neil. Camille had assigned it for some reason she wasn't told, but she didn't mind this one so much. At least Neil was fair with her and didn't treat her any differently. Besides, it gave her time to vent without having to talk about it. She still wasn't sure how far she could trust her friends. Just as she was beginning to think she was alone, Neil popped out of the little shack, almost tripping over the black concave shield. "Ah, there you are," he said with a smile. After that first day, she learned he smiled quite frequently and was not all frowns. She was glad of that, really. Smiles suited him better. "I was beginning to think you were going to be late." "I kind of am, and I apologize," she told him, hoping she wouldn't have to do more push-ups for being late. So you are. Malik hold you up?" he inquired. Yes, she stammered, surprised that he could guess that. She hadn't known he was aware of her schedule. "He wants me to take supplementary classes." "It wouldn't be necessary if you did the work," he chided. "I am doing the work," she said, frustrated. "He's throwing it away and giving me zero participation without even looking at it. Literally. As soon as he sees my name on the paper, he makes up some bullshit excuse and tosses it in the trash without even looking beyond my name." That made Neil frown for some reason. No one else seemed concerned about how unfair everyone was being, Malik in particular, so why would he? "I'll talk to him about it later. See if you can make copies of all your work in each class and give them to me at the end of the day." "Yes, Neil." "Good. Today we're just going to talk. You're doing well enough in my class and that you don't need any supplementary lessons." "But I can hardly keep up with everyone else." "Actually, I've not been keeping up at all," Krista argued. "You really think that matters? You weren't raised in any of this, so I don't expect you to be like everybody else. True, you've had some training in the past, which is why I'm surprised you think that not keeping up means you're failing. You're doing your best, and that's what matters," he told her. "But it isn't good enough. I should be doing better. I should be perfect," Neil interrupted her, sounding and even looking bemused. "You should be the perfect student with straight A's, loved by everyone, class valedictorian. You should be the perfect martial artist with a black belt by now and the perfect athletic body. You should be able to do a perfect spinning roundhouse kick without losing your balance on the first try." "Well," Krista said dubiously, "maybe not all of that, but..." "But what? Tell me, what is perfection?" "Perfection is being perfect." "What does that entail?" That was a difficult question to answer. There was so much to perfection, to being perfect, that she didn't know how to put it into words. "Perfection is a human construct," Neil continued. "The idea of perfection differs from one person to the next, and each idea is unobtainable and frankly unrealistic. Tell me, is it realistic to expect you to perform a perfect spinning kick of any kind on the first try?" "Well, no." "Exactly. It takes practice, more practice than many would believe. Is it realistic to expect a good grade without studying?" "No, you have to study and do the work to get the grade." "Where are you going with this?" she asked. "Just this. Everyone has this idea of what perfection is, and it is unobtainable and unrealistic. Why should we try to obtain an ideal that is unobtainable? Why should we say our best efforts are not enough because we are not perfect? Can we even be perfect when perfection cannot be obtained?" "We should at least try," Krista pouted. She had no idea how he had read her mind so well. She expected perfection from herself and had since she was a child, and was constantly frustrated when she could not do something perfect or be perfect. However, something made sense about what he was saying. She just didn't want to admit it, not even to herself right now. "Trying is fine. Go ahead and try. Do your best while trying. Don't expect yourself to be perfect, though. Even with all the practice and studying in the world, you cannot be perfect, because perfection doesn't exist. It is a human construct, and a toxic one at that. Now that we got that behind us, let's move the subject along. I've talked to Camille, and I can't do anything about the bullies, but I can train you to cope with their jabs better." "What do they say to hurt or do to hurt you?" If Krista hadn't known better, she would have thought from his tone and expression that he was genuinely concerned. She doubted he really was, beyond that of a teacher concerned for a struggling student, but it would have been nice if it had been more than that. Why? She asked herself. Why does it matter if he cares or not? Why would you want it to be more? You're an outsider. You're fat and ugly, and you can't keep up. So why do you think he would see you as anything more than another student? Don't be more stupid than you already are. Mostly it's comments about my weight, or the fact that I'm falling behind in almost all of my classes. The one class I'm doing well in, they call me a freak. They aren't wrong, though, she said finally. Why are they not wrong? Neil asked, sounding confused. She almost believed it was genuine. Because I am. I'm fat and ugly and stupid, and I have a hard time controlling myself. When everyone else is lighting candles, I'm melting the whole candle. I can't concentrate during meditation very well, and no matter what I do in my other classes, it isn't enough. Krista had to clamp her jaw shut. Now that someone was asking such prying questions, she felt the words tumbling out of her before she could stop them. Those were thoughts she couldn't share with anyone else. She knew it sounded like she was throwing herself a pity party, and perhaps she was, but it was all the truth. It was a painful truth she didn't want to tell others because she didn't want their pity. There was more, but she didn't want to speak it. You really believe all that? Neil asked, his normal smile slipping a bit, now looking concerned. What's the proof? Just look at me, she yelped, her eyes stinging with tears near to falling down her cheeks. She had to hold her breath for a moment to hold back a hitch in her breath, before taking a long, deep breath to calm herself. It didn't work. I'm over 100 pounds overweight, and even if it is hidden in these rubs, it's still evident in my face. I can't get a good grade to save my life. I can't control myself as well as everyone else. Krista could feel a hot tear streaming down her face in spite of her best efforts, and she quickly spun around so that Neil would not see it. She hated crying, she really did, and she especially hated crying in front of other people. She felt so weak, being unable to handle the stress she had been under for so long. She felt like a crybaby, on the verge of tears at any given moment throughout the day, and sometimes during the night when she could not sleep, which was more often than she wanted to admit to anyone else but herself. She wiped the tear with her brown sleeve, wiping both eyes as another tear started down the other cheek. She tried to take another deep breath, but it came in a soft sob that she tried to muffle. Her face burned in shame. Now she would be known as a crybaby on top of everything else. What's the evidence against those thoughts? Neil said gently. He knew she was crying, and though he made no move to show it, he could hear it in his voice. Panic rose inside her, hot and fierce, and she could not control the sob that came out. It was all she could do to keep it somewhat quiet. Panic and hatred for herself for being so weak that she could not stop herself from crying. There isn't any, she sobbed quietly, holding the sobs back enough to keep them quiet when in reality she wanted to scream was becoming increasingly difficult. What about the fact that you've been losing weight? He told her. You may not see it, but I do. And being overweight doesn't make a person ugly, their personality does. How about the fact that you don't slack off in class? You may not be able to do what everyone else is doing, not yet, but you're the hardest working student I've ever seen, and that's saying something. And when I see you outside of your scheduled classes, you're either doing assigned chores or studying. Most of the other students spend that time socializing or playing little tricks with their power, but I've never seen or heard of you doing any of that. Truth be told, I wish you would socialize more. It would be better for your morale. Let's not forget that you weren't raised here, so meditation does not come as naturally to you as it does to us, so cut yourself some slack. The mind doesn't like to be idle, which is why it wanders. As to control over your power, I say you have more control than most others, simply by the fact that you refuse to use it outside of a classroom setting. I know how difficult that is, not touching that energy all around you that makes you feel more alive. Most students can't do that, and I don't think you're ugly. So how about having a little forgiveness for yourself, Neil told her, taking off each point he made by raising a finger for each point. Rather than making her feel any better, hearing all that praise deepened her panic and self-hatred. She knew it was undeserved, that he was just trying to make her feel better even though none of that was true. She just couldn't accept that there was anything good to her, though she tried her best to be good enough. Panic and self-hatred ripped a deep-throated sob from her chest, though she tried to fight it, and she found that she could no longer hold herself up. She slumped to her knees, hiding her face in her hands, as though doing so might ease the pain in her chest and make those thoughts go away, or at least ease some of the self-hatred by hiding her tears from Neil. She felt her shoulders hunching inward, trying to make herself as small as possible, wishing that the earth would just swallow her up. For that matter, the ground beneath her began to tremble with each unbidden sob. "Whoa, hey now," Neil said as the trembling began to grow. She felt his warm hand on her shoulder, and was unsure if it was to steady himself on the unsteady ground, or if he was trying to pull her out of her thoughts. "Calm down, Krista." In spite of his words, she could not find it in herself to calm down. She wanted to, but she didn't know how. The panic and self-hatred were growing, and she didn't know how to make it stop, which caused her to panic more. Her breath came in rapid, shallow gasps, and she felt as though she were suffocating. "Krista, take a deep breath," Neil said, his voice calm in spite of the shaking earth. "Take a long, deep breath. Hyperventilating won't help you." It seemed impossible that she would be able to take a deep breath. Her lungs felt like they could not fill that far. She tried, but being hunched over on herself limited her lung capacity, so the breath she took, while it was a little deeper than the short, panting gasps she'd been taking, was not very deep. Finally, what she had learned about breathing from both Neil and from her senseis in the dojo she had previously trained in came to mind, and she forced herself to sit up straight with her shoulders back, removing her hands from her face. That helped a bit, but her breath was still shallow and quick, and she still felt as though she were suffocating. Her gasps began to come with deep, mournful sobs. "Deep breath," Neil reminded her, and this time she managed to force herself to take a long, deep breath. Once, twice, thrice, until finally her breathing became normal, though she still could not stop the tears or the sobbing. "There, that's a start. I'm going to teach you a skill I learned from books here, and I want you to use it when you start to panic, okay? It's called grounding. You with me?" She nodded her head shakily, hunching in on herself again and rocking back and forth on her knees. She forced herself to breathe slowly to prevent hyperventilating again, but she could not force herself to look up or straighten her back. "All right. I want you to find 5 things you can see and tell me everything you can about each thing. Go into as much detail as you can. Don't just name one thing and move on to the next," he said, his hand still on her shoulder. The ground still quaking, though the rumbling was not quite so bad now. "I see," Krista said slowly, looking around. "I see the ground. It's brown and hard and cracked in some places." "Is it smooth or rough?" Neil asked. "It seems smooth, but if you look long enough you can see little hills and valleys." "Is anything growing on it?" "No, it's barren, but there are some blades of dead grass in a few places that have been tracked on." "All right, what's another thing you see?" he asked patiently. Oddly, the rumbling was quieting, as were her thoughts, though they still raced in her head, making her head feel full and busy, like an internet window open with 50 different tabs open. "My gi. It's brown too, but darker than the ground. It's rough and woven, but the material is thick and durable. It has dust stains on it from sitting on the ground. I'm going to get in trouble for that," she said, panic beginning to rise up at the thought of another beating for being unkempt. "No help for that," Neil said calmly. "You're sitting on the ground, after all, and you can't really keep a gi tidy. Not when you're working and sweating in it and being tossed on the ground during practice. What's the next thing?" "I see the grass in the distance. It's vibrant green, more vibrant because of the sunlight. The blades are just a couple of inches tall. They've been cut recently. The tops of the blades are flat rather than pointed. It's thick and soft." Oddly, the sight of green grass seemed to calm her a bit. "Next thing?" Neil asked as the rumbling finally came to a stop. "I see one of the classroom buildings. The bottom half is brick, and the top half is wood. The brick is deep reddish brown and rough, with rough gray lines between the bricks where the cement holds them together. The wood seems smooth, but up close it's rough. I can see the pattern of the rings beneath the white paint. It is 2 stories tall, and the roof is dark gray and rough, and the gutters are painted white. There's one open window on the bottom floor that has a light on. I think a class is being taught there right now. Good, he said soothingly. One more. I see my hands. They are pale. The skin is kind of dry, and the fingernails are flaky. That's always been a problem for me. I see the folds of skin over the knuckles that allows them to bend without stretching the skin too much. There's a slight blue tint to the nails because my hands are kind of cold. There's a small scar on the back of my right hand where I was hit with a rock once. The left thumb has another small scar where I accidentally cut myself while cutting up a potato, she continued. Good. Now 4 things you can feel. Same thing. Give all the detail you can, he told her. This continued through all the other senses, counting down. 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, 1 thing she could taste. Though on the last one she had nothing in her mouth that she could taste to describe, so she chewed on some grass. When she was finished, she realized she felt much calmer. Still sad, still distracted, and now tired for some reason, but she was otherwise calm. How did you do that? She asked wonderingly. Did you use your power for that? Nope, he said with a bright grin, as though proud of himself and maybe even proud of her, though why he would be proud of her was something she could not understand at the moment. That was all you. The premise of grounding is that it draws your attention outside of your head by forcing you to focus on what's around you, down to the smallest degree. You can't focus on 2 things at once. The human brain isn't meant to do that. So by forcing yourself to focus on what's outside of you, you can't focus on what's going on inside. If you're not focused on what's going on inside your head, you can't panic. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, she said, suddenly feeling silly for allowing herself to panic like that and panicking over seemingly nothing. Thank you. It's part of what I'm here for. Now, what was going on inside your head? Neil asked her, squatting down in front of her with his elbows resting on his knees. Krista hesitated. She'd already said too much as it was by telling him what she had. She couldn't bring herself to tell him any more than that all the good things he'd said about her were all lies, that she could not bring herself to believe, even if there was more evidence to support those things than there were to support her own assumptions about herself. Part of her wondered why she was so stubborn about hating on herself when there was physical evidence pointing to the contrary, but she ignored it. The evidence seemed paltry, even false to her. Neil fortunately took her silence to mean she didn't want to talk. All right. I can't make you talk about it if you don't want to, but know that I'm always willing to listen without judgment. So whenever you're ready, you can tell me whatever you like. I'm here to help you. I haven't hurt you yet, have I? No, she said after a moment of thought. He really had not hurt her. He was the only one of her teachers who was fair to her, stern where she knew he needed to be, but not unfair about it. But that doesn't mean you never will. True enough, I suppose, he said, surprising Krista. Most other people got defensive when, on the rare occasion, she told them the same thing, telling her that they never would. I'm only human, which means I will make mistakes. I'm not perfect. If I ever do, you tell me, because likely I don't know what I did to hurt your feelings, and I don't want to repeat that mistake out of ignorance. But I also want you to realize that you are human too, and you don't have to be perfect. You also don't have to be silent, and not every hurtful thing is intentional. You don't have to deal with everything by yourself. That last part surprised Krista. No one had said anything like that to her. True, they never said the opposite either, but she always assumed that she had to do everything herself because no one was going to help her. She hated when she couldn't do something herself because she thought it made her weak and incapable. She had to be strong for everyone else, even if she couldn't be for herself, and hated not being able to do anything, without help. What kind of life did you live before coming here? Neil mused, mostly to himself. Why do you ask? Krista responded, trying to sound nonchalant, but failing badly. You seemed surprised that you don't have to do everything by yourself. You hate to be seen crying and for that matter, you seem to hate crying at all. You're perfectionistic to a fault on yourself, but understanding of other people's faults. None of that started here, though I suppose all the bullying has exacerbated it. I don't see why it matters. Lots of people have had worse lives than me, she shrugged uncomfortably. She hadn't even told Ileana about her life before her kidnapping. Though she had mentioned a bit to Hachiro, which she immediately regretted. She didn't want to be seen as a whiner on top of everything else, and it really wasn't anyone's business but her own. Life isn't a competition to see who has it worse, Neil said flatly. Other people may have it worse in some ways, but clearly you have your own experiences. Clearly to you, your own experiences have been pretty bad. Do you want to talk about it? Krista hesitated again. She really didn't want to talk about it for fear she would start whining about how bad her life seemed before coming here, but part of her told her to do it anyway. Part of her wanted to share with someone what she'd seen and been through, even if it wasn't really the worst in the world. Still, it was a discomforting thought, sharing that kind of thing with someone she barely knew or trusted. Trust had to be earned, but how would he earn it if she didn't give him a chance? I was raised by my grandparents, she began, just as it seemed Neil was going to say something, probably dismissing her from having to tell him anything. Well, too late now. They adopted me and my brother when we were little after our parents died. Grandma was a little overprotective of us, but that was because she loved us and told us that she loved us, and that she was proud of us. She died last year. I think Grandpa loves us, but it's hard to tell. All he does is yell at us and tell us how stupid and lazy and worthless we are. More so me than my brother. To him, I was just a housekeeper. He told me so to my face, that doing all of the chores was paying my room and board. He told us lots of stories, though, and I enjoyed those. Most of them taught good lessons, like drinking responsibly or how not to make a pie crust. You'll have to tell me those stories sometime, Neil said with a wry grin. The pie crust thing sounds like it's a good story to hear. It is. He told me that one before I ever made my first pie, and I've never had a pie crust go wrong because of it, she told him. You can cook, too? Hell, I wish I'd known that sooner. How'd your parents die? Do you want to talk about it? He asked. It wasn't something she liked talking about, that one. It was too horrible, and to this day she didn't understand the reasoning behind it, but something kept her from keeping it to herself this time as she usually did. She wasn't sure what it was, perhaps relief that she could talk to someone, but it was effective. Murder-suicide. I don't know why he did it or what happened. I was told my father killed my mother, then himself. I don't think my grandparents liked my mother much. Neither had anything good to say about her. So I think maybe she pushed my father over the edge, she said, each word done slowly, as though dragged from her with a team of horses. I'm sorry to hear that, Neil told her, and he really did sound remorseful. Your grandparents must have loved you and your brother a lot to adopt you after their death. Grandma did, certainly. At least, she's the one who showed it. I think to Grandpa we were nothing but a burden. He never once told me when I did a good job on anything, even though I got an A in all of my classes but math. Got a B in that class every time, no matter how hard I tried, she said quietly, remembering hurt. I'm sure he did, or he wouldn't have shared those stories with you. I think maybe he doesn't really know how to express his feelings in a healthy manner. I can see where your perfectionism comes from, he told her calmly, but she could tell from his expression he was none too happy with her grandfather himself. She didn't understand why he would be upset, though. Where do your trust issues come from? That question took her by surprise. She had made no mention of her trust issues or anything that could cause them, so how did he know? Her surprise must have shown on her face. Why are you so surprised? You may not talk about trust issues or not trusting people, but your actions speak for you. Everything you told me has come like it was dragged out of you, and I suspect there's a lot more you haven't told me, which is fine. I doubt you've even told Ileana much of this, if anything, and she's the only person that I've seen you talk to at any length. Well, her and Hachiro, which is new, but you still talk to her more than you do Hachiro, so I take it you trust her to some extent, he told her. She's one of the few who hasn't bullied me. At least, not yet, she muttered, as she could feel her cheeks warming in embarrassment. She had tried to keep her insecurities hidden, but it seemed as though she had failed miserably. How much more of her insecurities did he know of? I don't think she will, either, Neil mused with chagrin. For all her faults, she's as loyal as they come. Both of you are. Krista blinked in surprise. How many more surprises did he have for her? What made him think she was so loyal? Don't tell me you think I haven't noticed, he said, sounding surprised himself. I've seen you cover for some of Ileana's tricks when they were particularly bad, much to your own detriment. And you still haven't told anyone that it was Hachiro that tripped you up in my class and not Sandra. Wait, what? I only half suspected that, but I don't have any proof, she exclaimed. I felt him touch his power a hair before everyone else. That's the only proof I have. I only punished Sandra because she stepped forward on his behalf and decided to play along. Looks like it paid off, though. You actually got Hachiro to befriend you. He's a hard one to befriend. Seems to me like you have a talent for that. How so? No one else will befriend me, she told him. They will on their own time, and those that don't, well, it is their loss. As I said, you got Hachiro to befriend you, so it will all be downhill from there. You may not know this, but though Hachiro is highly respected in all of his classes and used as an example for everyone to follow, he has very few friends. Too many people are intimidated by his record of being the perfect student to befriend him, and those who are not are the ones who are jealous of his perfect record and want to bring him down. It's hard to make friends that way, particularly when you feel like you can't trust any who would befriend you, since they might be doing so to bolster their own reputation rather than to actually be a friend, Theo explained. I had no idea he had it so hard. I thought it was something that came easily to him, that he'd have a lot of friends, she said wonderingly. Yeah, things aren't always as they seem, Neil told her. Malik, for example. I read something about him, Krista admitted, though she wouldn't tell him what or where. The paper snake Hachiro had given her turned out to be notes taken from his personal file about his history, as well as his disciplinary record when he was in training. He came here when he was 10, didn't he? Why isn't he treated differently? Neil blinked at her in surprise. She strongly suspected she wasn't supposed to know that. Where did you... Never mind. I'm going to pretend I didn't just hear that. Malik is treated the way he is because he's made everyone think he's willfully forgotten everything he learned outside in favor of strictly adhering to what he was taught here. So strictly, in fact, that a few have expressed concern as to how hard he is about the rules. Anyway, that for another time, after I wrinkle out how you came by that information. Let's change the subject. I think I get Ileana too. She has surprisingly few friends given her attitude, so those she does have, she treasures. That had not been a satisfying explanation. If Malik could be treated with respect after being so abusive to her, why shouldn't she earn their respect with her own hard work? Why should he treat her any differently when he too was an outsider? She wanted to say as much, but Neil's expression plainly told her he was not going to hear any of it. She told me about her family, how they came here before she was born, and treated the way I'm being treated now, how they're only accepted now because they conform to the teachings, she said finally. As much as they can be said to be accepted anyway. Some of the more hardcore adherents still treat them like outcasts, but those are few and far between, so it's not much of a problem. I think Ileana could go far here if she could ever control her temper and learn to follow the rules whether or not she likes them. You found two nearly friendless people and befriended them, yet you believe you have no talent for making friends. You've got no self-confidence, no self-esteem. I get it. Life hasn't been very nice to you, and the one person who was like a father figure to you mistreated you and ensured you wouldn't have that self-esteem you needed. That doesn't mean it has to stay that way forever, though. Wouldn't you one day like to live without those self-doubts, all that self-loathing that I see in your face? He asked her. That would be nice, but I don't see how it is possible when it doesn't seem real or truthful, Krista said, sighing deeply. She didn't want to feel this way forever, but she didn't know how she could change it, or even if it could be changed. She had felt this way for so long, it seemed it would always be this way. She tried to end the weight, the hurt, the pain, the fear, and the anxiety, and the loneliness more than once. And she was sure one day she would be successful, simply because she saw no other way to make the pain go away. There are ways. Let me help you, Neil offered. How? How can you help me? I'm a lost cause, she said, beginning to shrink in on herself again. While she felt a bit calmer now, no longer panicking, that hurt was still there, and it refused to abate. There seemed no end to it. No such thing, Neil told her simply, though sounding a bit surprised. There are hard cases, true, and you might be one, but lost causes do not exist. I can help you, but I need you to want the help for yourself, or it won't help at all. Are you a psychiatrist or something? Krista eyed him suspiciously. She could not bring herself to trust psychiatrists, or she would have sought help long ago. She had her own experiences in the past that had soured her view of therapists. Nah, but I do have past experience of my own, and I've learned healthy ways of coping with them. I can teach you those tools. You used to lack self-confidence, Krista said, once again surprised. You don't seem the kind of person to have ever lacked self-confidence or esteem. Well, you're not completely wrong there. I am confident in myself, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. It wasn't always like that, though. Come to think of it, I know Ileana's history and now Hachiro's, but not yours. What was your life like growing up? Who are your parents? Krista asked. That's a fair question. Quid pro quo, as you said to Ileana. She told me about it, mostly because she didn't know what quid pro quo meant and wanted a definition. Neil explained, in response to seeing her eyebrows shoot up into her hairline. She hadn't thought Ileana remembered that conversation, or at least not that very quote. Well, I grew up here, as did my parents and grandparents. I'm a fifth-generation special soul. Special souls are not quite genetic, but for some reason in my family the special line runs strong. Anyway, my parents both died when I was little. Mom was mugged when she went to visit a nearby city, and the mugger shot her and killed her for some pocket change in her car keys. Dad was distraught and tried to use his song to bring her back, but no song, no matter how powerful, can bring back the dead. Wow, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't wonder if you hate outsiders. One killed your mom for something petty, and your dad destroyed his own soul because of it, Krista said regretfully. She could see the pain in his face, though he tried to hide it behind a confident smile. What about your grandparents? Did they raise you too? Yes and no, Neil replied after clearing his throat. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, this is very much a village, if a hidden one, and everyone had a hand in raising me, including my grandparents. I struggled for a while with depression after my parents died, wondering why someone would kill a person for a little money and some keys, wondering why I wasn't good enough for my dad to stick around with me instead of leaving me behind. I blamed myself for a while, illogical though it was. I thought I was such a bad son that he destroyed himself beyond rebirth just to get away from me. Fortunately, though, my grandparents stepped in and got me some help, and with everyone taking a hand in raising me, I was never lonely or unloved. I miss them still and always will, but I know now it was not my fault, and that people care about me, and that I am worthy of love and compassion, just as you are. Where are your grandparents now? They died 3 years ago, both within a month of each other. Grandfather had a heart attack, and grandmother died of a broken heart after that. I miss them too, but I think I'm more at peace about their deaths because they lived to a ripe old age and went naturally, Neil told her. I'm so sorry, Neil, she said, her voice quivering as she fought to control herself. She could relate to some extent with his pain, though not the fullest extent. He lived a different life than she had, and his parents had died in a different manner than hers. His parents and grandparents had been different people, more loving than her own, so he must hurt more than she at their loss. She felt ashamed of herself for complaining about her troubles when Hachiro, Ileana, and Neil had it worse than she. Before she was even aware of it, tears were streaming down her face again, so she brushed them off viciously with her sleeve, trying to hide the motion by using it to wipe strands of hair from her face that had fallen from the tail at the back of her neck. Don't be, he told her. Much to her shame, he did not look away as more tears escaped the confines of her ducts. I went and made you cry again. I'm the one who's sorry. "Oh no," she whimpered, hiding her face in her hands again. The tears would not be held back any more, and it was all she could do to stop a sob from escaping her throat, only adding to her shame. "Hey, none of that now. If you need to cry, you cry, and don't be afraid of letting people see it." "There's no shame in crying," he told her as he put his hand back on her shoulder in a comforting gesture. "I hate crying," she whimpered softly. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry you have to see me like this. I hate it." "Why?" "Because I'm weak. If I were stronger, I wouldn't need to cry," she said between soft sobs. She tried to hold them back, but they would not be restrained any longer, not after such a strong effort to escape for so long. "Now what makes you think that? Crying is not weakness. It is human, and it is healthy. If anything, bottling it up makes it fester to toxicity. You don't always have to be 10 feet tall and bulletproof. Just don't let the tears control you. Cry if you need to, but you need to be in control of them, not they you." Krista kept her face hidden in her hands so she could not see Neil move, but she felt his hand leave her shoulder, which nearly sent her into hysterics. That hand on her shoulder, small gesture though it may seem, was oddly comforting, the only bit of comfort she could cling to as tears poured down her face. She heard him shifting on the ground, afraid that he was tired of her temper tantrum after all and was going to leave her there to cry alone. However, the shifting was brief, and suddenly she felt a broad hand rubbing her upper back. It felt odd at first. She had no physical affection from anyone, not even her grandmother, since she had grown too big to sit on the elderly woman's lap at the age of 10. But it was soothing for some reason, and soon she found that the sobs would not come so easily. What once she could not hold back, she now could not summon. As they slowed to a mere sniffle and whimper, the tears gradually slowing. She couldn't bring herself to tell him how much she appreciated the gesture. To be honest, she wasn't sure how to handle it. "Thank you, Neil," she said quietly once the tears finally stopped. She was doubly tired now for some reason. She didn't understand it. She never had. But for some reason, any time she had a panic attack or found herself crying, she always felt so tired afterwards. Why that should be was a curiosity to her. It was hardly strenuous crying, and panicking wasn't exactly physical exertion. Either way, though, she felt like she could fall asleep on the training grounds right then and there. The consequences be damned. But she had shown too much vulnerability for one day. It would not show that much after having cried in front of Neil for no other reason than he had spoken about his parents' deaths twice over. "That's what I'm here for," he told her simply. "Well, that and training you in martial arts and making sure you survive your training. How do you feel?" "Tired. I don't know why, though." "I have a good guess as to why. Panic attacks take a toll on the body, more than most people would suspect. You just had 2. I know you want to rest, and I would love to let you, but you have class starting in a few minutes, and I don't think they would excuse you for a nap, no matter what the reason," Neil told her regretfully. "You'll just have to power through it. Stop by the kitchens tonight, and I'll make you some tea to help you sleep." Yes, Neil. Before I go, can I ask you one more question?" Krista said as she tried to stand, though truthfully, she just wanted to lay down and sleep anyway. "What's up?" "Why are you making such an effort to help me? Why do you treat me so well when all the other teachers do everything they can to make me miserable?" It was Neil's turn to hesitate this time. It was not a hesitation that looked like he was unsure he wanted to answer, or even what to answer. It was a hesitation pregnant with surprise, though he could not comprehend why she would ask such a question. Why not? If everyone else is treating you like garbage, you need someone to be fair with you. Besides, you're my responsibility, and I can't expect you to do well in your studies when you have so much on your mind with no one to help you with it," he told her finally. Why that should hurt so much was something she could not understand. He was her instructor, so of course she would be his responsibility. All of his students were his responsibility, and she supposed he took that responsibility more personally than the other teachers. But why would it hurt so much to be told that he cared because she was his responsibility? Maybe because it seemed as though he cared because he felt like he had to, whether or not he wanted to. She was just another burden to him, just as she was to everyone else. She was overreacting, and she knew it. Her emotions were still raw. She was still too emotional right now, but she didn't know what to do about it. Well, no time for that now. The bell was ringing now, and if she didn't hurry, she would be late for her next class and earn herself another penance. Again. She really did need that on top of her current mood and raw emotions. Rather than answering, she hid the tears threatening to once again escape the confines of her eyes by turning and quickly making her way across the training yard back towards the dorms so she could change. If she ran, she could just make it in time. She did not see the curious and thoughtful look on Neil's face as she left. Neil watched as Krista left the training grounds, her pace quick and picking up speed until she was running. He watched until she was out of sight around one of the education buildings, headed towards the dorms, likely to get changed before her next class. She would need to run to escape yet another penance. Still, something was off. Why did she look so hurt when she left? Was it something he'd said? He hadn't meant to hurt her feelings again. That seemed to be a common thing today for some reason. He was tempted to brush it off as her being sensitive today. He knew enough people to know that everyone had sensitive days, even if they did come across differently. But something else was bothering her, and he hated not knowing what it was. Well, whatever it was, he would not solve it standing around doing nothing. He would ask her about it later and see if he could resolve it. He didn't want to risk animosity rising between him and his student. For now, he meant to have a few words with Malik about being fair. The hazing was bad enough, but intentionally failing a student who was doing their best simply because you did not like them was not good teaching, and Malik knew better. Malik, of all people, should know better.